Hey everybody, it's Jesse again, and you're watching another edition of Gen X Thinks. And today I'd like to talk about why I believe that the 80s was the best generation for teenagers to grow up in. To start out, we had just started to get technology. We just started, to have video game consoles and all that stuff, and we didn't have the mobile phones yet, but I think that was a plus for growing up as a teenager, because we weren't, staring down in our palm of our hand for 28 hours a day. So we actually had to go out to the mall, and the malls were really big at that time. And before the 80s, they weren't. They didn't have those big social spots where you could go shopping and do all that stuff, in the previous decades like they did in the 80s. We would go to the mall just to hang out, play video games at the arcade and stuff. That's the kind of stuff we did. We had unique things in the 80s that were really cool, really social, and really fun. And that's why I believe that the 80s was the best decade to grow up in. You could ride your bike to the mall a lot of times, or, if you're old enough at the time to drive a car, pile up a bunch of your friends in the car and you'd all go to the mall or whatever. They had a movie theater in the mall where we go to watch movies, and it was a really great decade to be a teenager. So we had a lot of new things that the older generations didn't have, but in my personal opinion, we didn't have the newer things we have today now that are kind of detrimental to the younger generations. We didn't have those yet. So we got to grow up in a time where, you talk to people face to face, and, social interactions and physical vicinity was still a real thing. And entire lives weren't spent online, and you didn't have as much opportunity to be fake like you can online now. You can be a dozen different people online, just have a dozen different Facebook accounts, and you can be anything you want online now, and people are. I'm just me. So you're stuck with me if you're watching this channel, because I never learned how to be fake. I just don't. That, to me, that takes a talent. Honestly, it does. That takes a talent, like actors and stuff like that, to pretend to be something else. It's a talent, like drawing or singing or anything else. And I just don't have that talent. I'm just who I am, and a lot of us are from that generation. I believe we never really cultivated that talent. There's that. And if you think about it for a second, the 80s is when rock music just came into its own. You know what I mean? Before that, we had a little bit of rock. We had Black Sabbath and stuff, and we had Leonard Skinner, but that Leonard Skinner and those bands, Fleetwood Mac and that stuff from the 70s was kind of toned down. Not for its time, but in the 80s, listening back on that stuff, it was kind of toned down compared to our, In Excess, Def Leppard with the one-armed drummer. Come on. No other generation had songs like Pour Some Sugar on Me and watching a guy beat the crap out of the drums with one arm. It was a great time to be alive and that age, because it was just some really awesome things were going on. I liked our slang vocabulary back then. I know I'm biased about that, but this new stuff, calling cars whips and whatever, I think that's old now. I tell you how old I am. I think that's old now, maybe, but the new slang that they come up with now, it's just, I don't know, it just has a bad sound to it. To me, the 80s slang will always be the best. Awesome, like Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, bogus, You know, gnarly. We had the best stuff. To me, that's my personal opinion. We had the best slang as teenagers. Nobody before or after us, you know, could compete with Bill and Ted. So that kind of stuff. But our music of that decade was really something special, and I don't think will ever be repeated because, as I said, rock music was just starting to come into its own. You know, heavy metal was just coming out and just becoming a separate thing, and later on we had grunge and stuff in the early 90s, late 80s and early 90s, but rock music just started to mature and become an avenue of its own little slice of entertainment. And rap music just started. That was before they started calling it hip hop or whatever else. Hip hop wasn't a thing for anybody younger that's watching this. Hip hop, we didn't call it hip hop back then. That didn't come out until later. When rap music came out, the rappers called it rap. Everybody that listened to it called it rap. And all of us 13 to 15-year-old boys, you know, buying NWA tapes, and they were tapes back then, cassette tapes. We helped start rap. If it weren't for us buying them and running around, you know, the schoolyard rapping, trying to be Eazy-E and Ice-T, that stuff wouldn't exist right now. But we, across America, us 13-year-old boys bought millions of those tapes and emulated those guys. And we didn't even know what they were rapping about. We didn't know what slinging rocks even meant. I didn't know what it meant personally. Maybe everybody else did. Maybe I was the only ignorant one. But I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know what they were talking about. But it sounded cool, you know. And then we had the other kind of more I don't want to say vanilla, but a tamer kind of rap at the time, which was MC Hammer and Tone Loc. Remember Tone Loc with Funky Cole Medina, and MC Hammer with Hammer Time, and was the name of the song Prayer or Pray? Maybe it was just Pray. And now we pray, pray, pray. You got to pray just to make it today, and so we pray. But that kind of stuff, we just had great music, and it was new. Rap and hip hop wasn't 30 years old back then. It was brand new. Just like we were unwrapping a package. Nobody'd ever seen it before. It was like, you know what I'm saying? It was brand new. That kind of rock music was brand new. It wasn't, they hadn't done that kind of stuff before. The big hair and the screaming in the mic. Well, Black Sabbath had done it a little bit, but Black Sabbath was really, you know, I was a little kid. I didn't really hear about Black Sabbath too much until later on. I was already close to being an adult maybe before I really listened to Black Sabbath too much. But it was years after they had done their, really been through their prime. But that, the music, and our movies. Our movies, we had great movies. Maybe a lot of them weren't the classic, you know, Academy Award winning screenwriters and directors and actors and stuff, but we had some of the best teenage actors and some of the best movies just for pure teenage enjoyment. It didn't get any better. It just didn't. Lost Boys, Arnold Schwarzenegger with Commando and Predator and Rambo. They would just, and all of them, it seemed like all of them had these awesome one-liners. That decade had the most one-liners of any decade before or after. I'm a movie buff. I like movies, and I've watched a lot of movies. I've watched movies, you know, but all the movies I've seen since 2000, they don't have the amount of classic one-liners, memorable, that stick in your head, like that one decade of the 80s. I could sit here for 10 minutes and just rattle off one-liners from the 80s, and they've just stuck in my head. Now, I've watched the movies several times since then, but they just classic one-liners. You know, Arnold Schwarzenegger, "I'll Be Back," and Lost Boys, Death by Stereo, and the list just goes on. They just had all these great one-liners in all these movies throughout the entire decade. It was just awesome. So, our movies for teenagers, they were just the best of any decade. Our music was, for teenagers, now I'm talking, was the best for any decade. Now, before that, you know, they didn't even really have the different genres of music like we did, and like we do now. But it's really splintered off now, but it just started that divisions in the 70s and 80s. Before that, you know, you had like Roy Orbison and Frank Sinatra and these guys, but they would all just sing. Some of them are wonderful, beautiful classic songs, but they were all just kind of musicians, you know. I think country music back then was called country and western, and so that kind of had its own genre. The original Hank Williams, and I like some of that music from back then. I don't know if any of y'all have heard the song 16 Tons. You load 16 tons, what do you get? Now, I can't sing, so I apologize for putting y'all through that, but that's a song, and that's one of my favorite songs of all time, and it came out years before I was born. So I'm not disparaging any music or movies or anything in prior or later decades. I'm just saying ours was the best out of a lot of good decades. I think that ours was the best. It was just the most fun. You know what I'm saying? And we had a lot of freedom. As a little kid, it was dangerous. You know, looking back, you can say it was dangerous to have so much freedom as an 8-year-old and just, you know, kind of run around outside and drink from the hose and come in at dark or whatever, you know. And just, you know, your older brother is supposed to be watching you, but he's flirting with the girl next door and he's not really paying attention to you. So you just wander down the road and go play with the kids down there or whatever. So it was dangerous, but not really the way, you know, you envision. There wasn't like rashes of disappearing kids. I mean, you know, I think that kind of stuff is more prevalent now than it was back then. I mean, you heard about, you know, you saw kids on milk cartons and stuff back then, but it wasn't like we were afraid of that. If some guy pulled up, we would just, you know, run away. We wouldn't get in a van with him or whatever, you know what I'm saying? So, I don't know. But it just didn't, back then at the time, it didn't seem as dangerous as it does now. You know what I'm saying? It was just what we did. It was how the world was. And so coming into our teens with that amount of freedom was really cool, because we wanted to go to the mall, you went to the mall, you know, and you spend all day there, and your parents were glad you were gone. They weren't pestering you and beeping your phone because you didn't have a phone. You know what I mean? They were lucky if you found a payphone and called them and told them, you know, I won't be back till 10 o'clock tonight because I'm going to go over here and do this. You know what I'm saying? We just had a lot more freedom back then, and it was there wasn't all the fear, and everything was just more relaxed back then. It was really a really good time to grow up. It was a really fun time to grow up. Doesn't seem like so much pressure that's on kids now. We still had the benefits of some really cool technology, great movies, and places to go and things to do, and you know, cool bikes. We all had our bicycles when, you know, in our early teens. I had this like Frankenstein monster that I had put together trying to build the perfect bike, and it didn't have brakes, and I was just that thing was a rolling death trap. But I took that thing everywhere. I'm really interested in what y'all think, so if you would leave a comment and let me know what you think about the 80s. How do you remember the 80s? Do you remember it the same way I do, that kind of fun and free time? Or, you know, do you remember something different? Do you remember the music and the movies differently than I do? Because when I think back at that decade, that I just have a real fondness for the atmosphere. I wouldn't necessarily go back and be that age again, and go back and be that ignorant and, you know, that dumb, and just go through all the pain that I've been through since then. But I like my mind and my wisdom that I have now. What little I've gained, I really value it. So I wouldn't lose that for anything. But when I do look back on that decade, I have a real fondness just for the overall feeling of it. It brings back a lot of warm memories, and not necessarily memories of family and you know, myself, and just memories of the era, the really cool wacky things, the big hair and the parachute pants and the crazy jackets we had, the shiny bubbly, all that weird shit we did. Our style was awesome. I think we had the best style of any decade. You know what I'm saying? We had style. I don't care. I'll die on that hill. I love the style of the 80s with the big hair and all that stuff. It's my favorite. So I look back on that stuff, just the general, the aesthetic. I look back on that decade and just, I remember just the general aesthetic of everything, the world back then, and our clothes, our music, our, you know, our malls, and the way, you know, just the sounds and the how everything looked when you walked into a busy mall, and, you know, and you wanted to get to your store, or the arcade or the movie theater, whatever you were going, and, you know, making your way through the mall, and maybe you'd see somebody you knew, or maybe you were going there to meet some people or whatever. Just that kind of stuff. The overall feeling of the 80s is really a warm memory for me, a good one. So yeah, leave a comment, and if you made it this far in the video, please like it, subscribe to the channel if you would. I'll call it quits there. Hopefully I brought back some good memories for some people and some nostalgia. Oh, if you haven't seen Hot Tub Time Machine, that's a great movie for nostalgia. I know it came back later, like, you know, the guys are in their 40s and they go back to the 80s. But if you haven't seen that, and if you like, you know, brainless comedies, it's a good movie, but it's not, you know, it's not really deep movie. It didn't win a bunch of Academy Awards or anything like that, but it's a good movie for Generation X to remember the 80s. It's really good. I've seen it a couple times and I like it. So check that out if you have a mind, and if you like that kind of movie and you haven't seen it yet. So I'll let you go for now. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.